and welcome to Microfile, which gives you the chance to see again some of the best items from the recent series of Micro Live. And we start with a look at music and movement.
The ability of a micro to make music and to draw moving pictures is pretty well taken for granted. I mean, this sort of game is very common, as of always he goes. But, of course, with the right add-ons, a home micro can sound much better than this, and it can make some pretty impressive music.
Well, this is a professional music synthesizer which can create up to 8 different instrument sounds simultaneously, 8 different so-called voices. Now, of course, a human being can't play all 8 sounds at once, not from a single keyboard, but a machine can by using MIDI. That's the standard interface system which allows various musical instruments to communicate with each other. This synth here has a MIDI interface, and so too does the Atari ST computer. So you can send control information from the Atari to the synth, and that feature has attracted some pretty impressive software from Steinberg Research. It turns the ST into music's equivalent of a word processor, what you might call a music processor. Tony, what can it do?
Well, the software's been designed to be as comfortable and as friendly for a musician to use with a computer as possible. So if you look at the main screen, you'll see down at the bottom we have play, record, rewind, tape counter, the things you'd find on a tape recorder.
Just like a tape recorder, yes.
Exactly. And along the top here we have the 24 track select boxes. Tells you what you've recorded, what tracks are active.
Now, some of these tracks have got on marked on them, and that tells me that you've already recorded something.
That's right. There's a bass part and some drums that I've already recorded. So if I just play those for you, you can hear them. And at the bottom you can see the relative amplitude of the different tracks going up and down as they play.
Very realistic sounds, but let's make it absolutely clear. Those sounds aren't coming from the Atari, are they?
No, they're coming from the synthesizer, and the Atari's acting very much like a master controller, and it's telling the synthesizer what to play, how long to play it for, what notes, etc. like that.
And all that information is information that you have put in from the keyboard.
Yeah.
How difficult is that?
It's very simple, really. You treat it just like a tape recorder. If I wanted to overdub, for instance, a brass sound on top of what we've already recorded, I just press that button. We get a 2-bar count in to give me the tempo of the piece.
Well, you make it look very easy, but if I was doing that, I'm sure I'd make a pig's ear of it.
Well, if you make a mistake, of course, it's quite easy to go back and start again, but this software actually has a note edit page that allows you to look at what you've played in more detail. Now, across here, we have a 2-bar sequence, and these lines here divide the bars up. So there's 16 divisions in each bar there, and those black blobs are actually the notes I've played.
So the longer the blob, the longer the note you have.
That's right. These blobs are very short because I've played very short notes, but if I wanted to change that blob, I could make it a bit longer, and now we'd have a very long note.
Right, this is where that music processor idea
That's
comes
right.
in, isn't it? Just like a word processor.
And also, when you play in real time, your tempo as a human being can vary sometimes. The computer can actually auto-correct your tempo, move the beats that you've played, the notes you've played rather, to the nearest beat. So if I choose 16 here, and then I auto-correct it, you watch the notes and you'll see them all shuffle along to the nearest beat.
Right. Would you always do that, in fact?
Not always, because sometimes the effect is maybe too wooden, too mechanical, and it's nice to have some of the human error to make it sound more comfortable.
Right. Right, well, there are lots of other features here, of course, that we haven't seen, but tell me, why are these X's on some of these tracks
Right,
up
well,
here?
that means that there's something recorded on that track, but you can't hear it. It's like a muting function that you find in recording studios. If I was to take those 2 tracks and put them into play mode, I can play the whole sequence now with some voices on these parts here.
Oh, we've got the doobie-doos there.
That's right.
Well, it looks terrific, and you do make it look very easy, but tell me, what do the pros make of it?
Well, a lot of studios now are using it as standard equipment. In fact, you find a lot of studios actually advertising this as part of their sales.
Did I see this advertised in the back of Melody Maker?
Yeah, a lot
on
of studios use it now. And a lot of very famous artists use it, like Marillion, Dire Straits, people like that.
Terrific. Tony, thank you very much. Well, that's great. Put me down for one, please, Santa. The software sells for about £250, which isn't bad. But sadly, by the time you bought all the other kit here, the synths and so on, well, £2.5 grand is a bit beyond my budget. What about you, Leslie?
No, it's way out of my league as well. So let's come back down to earth. If you're on a limited budget, or maybe you've just got one of the old Brigade 8-bit micros, there is still a good selection of add-ons which can help you to get started in processing your computer-aided music. Let's have a listen to this one. listening to the music expansion system for the Commodore 64 rather, sorry, there's an add-on keyboard and a synthesizer. I think you'll agree it does give some pretty reasonable sounds. However, I've had enough of that now. If you want more than just a squeak out of the spectrum, then you'll first of all need to get it to drive a synthesizer. And this is one of the cheapest MIDI synths around. It's the Casio CZ101. And this is the sort of sound you'll get with this synth. Yeah, well, it's not brilliant, but remember, the sound quality does depend on your synthesizer, but how easy it is to use will depend on the software. And in this case, the software and the MIDI interface come from Cheetah, who specialise in the budget end of the music add-on market. And there are, of course, MIDI interfaces available for most of the popular micros, but this one is one of the cheapest at $49.95. But back to cheap synths for a moment, and one of the other problems with them is the tacky toy-like keyboard. Cheetah's answer to that is this new MIDI add-on keyboard. It is only a keyboard, it's not going to change the sound, but it does at least have a set of full-sized keys, so it feels right to play, and it costs only £99.95.
Well, here's an alternative approach which doesn't need a keyboard at all. It's an add-on box called the Music 5000 for the BBC Micro, and this is the kind of quality of sound. This tune is To the Manor Born, but for some reason they've chosen to play it on one of those awful club organs, at least it sounds like that. Mind you, I can change all that if I want to, simply by calling up another mix of sounds which I created myself. Same music, but totally transformed. Now, the music itself is entered in a programming language called AMPL. You define words in very much the same way as with logo or forth, and those words can be anything from a mix like that, a mix of sounds, to new individual voices. Well, I'll just show you the words that define the music you're listening to now. Yes, here we've got a couple of instrument voices there. We've got the mix defined, that's the one I did myself, mix 1, and these are various musical parts. So for example, part 4A, that's a bit of the bass line, for example. Now, on this system, there are two main ways of entering your music. You can either use the staff editor, which lets you put music in conventional musical notation, you know, the dots, crotchets, and quavers, that kind of thing. Well, that's okay if you can't imagine music written any other way, but it is rather wasteful on memory, and you can't do odd things like playing 1/5 notes. So a more flexible method is to use what they call text entry, like this. Now, first of all, I'll ask the machine to get part 4A. Part 4A get is the syntax there. And there, that's how the music, and that's how part of the bass line is stored in the computer's memory. Well, a bit of explanation here. These letters refer to the musical notes, C, B, A, G. But does that B go up from the C, or does it go down? Well, the convention is that if it's lowercase, it goes down. If it's uppercase, it goes up. Very straightforward. So that's a descending C, B, A, G, and so on. These numbers, they refer to the length of the note. 48 in this case is a crotchet, and 24, a quaver. And of course, you can edit the notes, just like editing on a word processor. You build up your music one part at a time, and there's room, even in the minuscule memory of the BBC B, for the whole of this piece. It's the last movement of Bach's Italian Concerto, and that's 3.5 minutes of quite busy 4-part music. It's a professional quality system, costs about £160, but it won't suit everyone. As you've seen, it's based around a programming language, so you need to be prepared to get your fingers dirty with a bit of code. Yes, gives a whole new meaning to a musical coda. So, to sum up on the various systems we've seen tonight, whatever your musical aspirations and however limited your technique, it's likely that there is something available to suit you. At the very least, you can get a micro to perform all the nifty finger work. And that opens up all kinds of possibilities, providing, of course, you've got the really important bit, the ideas.
Well, to get creatures running around the screen at this kind of speed, the programme would have to have used machine code. Fred took a look at some software which lets you produce animations like this, but without writing a line of code.
This is called Movie Maker, from a company with the rather strange name of Slippery Slug. Well, yes, OK, the shapes are rather chunky, but you can make them do more or less anything you like. Even so, there is a limit to what you can do on an 8-bit machine. In the end, the hardware forces you to compromise both the quality of the picture and the smoothness of movement. But just see what the 32-bit Amiga can do. Here we have a classroom. The professor moves across, and those words sink pleasingly into the sunset. Well, that's pretty snazzy for a do-it-yourself animation. But how was it produced? Well, the drawings were done using this package, Paint, which we demonstrated in the last series. The animation is handled by another package called Deluxe Video. As you may have guessed, there was in fact not one little man, but several. Here they all are, and you can see there just few differences there. The legs are in different positions, and at the end here, we've made him face towards us. Now, of course, I can make changes to that animation. I'll just get rid of this chap first. Pull that screen down. Come on, down you come, that's it. Right. Now, get a shot of this little mini screen here. Now, this screen shows the so-called timelines of the action. There are seconds marked at the top up here, and these three lines control what happens. The first line here is the background, that's the classroom. And down here, there's the line about the professor, that's walk prof. He appears, he animates across the screen. And at the bottom, this is what happens to the words micro live. They appear and eventually they move. Now, let's change the action of that professor. So we need to change the animation of his legs, that's the rate at which they move. And we also need to change the rate at which he moves across the screen. So I'll move those both up there. That should make him a bit faster. Now I pull down a screen at the top here, a menu, and select play video. Right, and that should get him cracking. Now, there's a bit of a pause while the computer sorts out all those instructions. Obviously, this is a demonstration, so it's a relatively simple piece of animation, but you could have lots of characters, lots of different scenes. You can even string them all together to make up a complicated story. Now, where is he? Ah, yes, there's the classroom, there's the prof, and as you can see, he moved a good deal faster than he did before. And the rest of the scene is exactly the same. Well, that is animation of a sort, and it's quite an achievement for a home micro. But that's about it. If you want real high-resolution, three-dimensional computer animation, then you'll have to look elsewhere.
The right honourable gentleman, please shut up. The right honourable gentleman, please shut up.
Well, I defy you to do that on your Spectrum. She was a prize-winning piece by Keith Waters, a student at Middlesex Polytechnic. To get that sort of realism in their animations, graphic artists often start with a model. Keith started with this head from Spitting Image. In fact, you can see how he's divided it up into simple shapes, triangles, rectangles and squares, which can then be translated into numbers. This process, called digitizing, is a means of turning real-world objects like this into a form that the computer can work on. Virgin Animations explains how it can be done.
What I'm doing with the digitizer is to input a stream of coordinates into the computer. The coordinates form the basis for a surface, which we will then be able to light and shade and treat like a normal surface. So it's very much like the first stage in carving something out of wood. Every time you press the button, you enter another point into the stream of coordinates. So by tracing round, pressing the button at regular points along the curve, you'll end up with a kind of approximation to a smooth curve. Now, this data is going to be fairly rough because there's no accurate way of kind of tracing round a curve. But what we can do is to come back and edit that later using a special editing program which we've written to allow us to smooth these things out and kind of finish it off and make it look all nice and smooth.
But the great secret of this system is that it can manipulate three-dimensional shapes in real time.
The important thing about animating on this system is that it allows you to use the buttons and dials over here to actually input to the animation. So having set the program running, I can kind of move my camera and my objects or anything else about in space just using these knobs, and I can actually see that happening.
The moves can be stored in memory, smoothed and later edited if necessary.
That's something that wasn't previously possible with kind of older computers and lesser forms of technology.
Well, all this sort of swooping about has become very popular and was much in evidence in a lot of the work exhibited at the 1987 Imaginer Conference, which was part of the Monte Carlo Television Festival.
Well, that was a first prize winner from the Imaginer Forum in the scientific category. And with me to have a look at some of the other entries is Martin Lambinane, designer of some of the best-known animations on British television. Martin, what did you think to that animation there?
I think it's terrific, actually, because it's a sensible use of computers. If you ever want to, say to a client, this is what we're going to build, the best thing is to build it, and that's what they've done. They built it on a computer, and in particular, here they've put it in the actual place it's going to go, in the right environment. And that's particularly difficult, actually, mixing live action with computer animation.
Well, of course, computers are quite good at dealing with geometric shapes, aren't they?
Yes, they're very, that's their best thing, really, and so that's why architecture is often used with computers.
Well, you used computer animation for the Channel 4 logo, and you also used it for this one. It's a lovely piece of work.
Happiness is a cigar called Hamlet, the mild cigar.
Great. Tell me how you did it.
Well, of course, it was a piece of computer animation, but unlike other jobs we had tackled, this had to be funny. Now, up to that point, nobody had made a funny computer graphic sequence. And so we turned to traditional animation. And we got the whole job animated by hand, and then made into a line test. And then we took that along to the computer house and said, copy that. And the result of that was we got much more fluid movement, we got acting out of it, and we got character out of it. That's why it's funny.
Would you like to take us through developing an advert, for example, using computer animation techniques?
Yeah, certainly. Well, you start with the script, and you start with something like this, the storyboard. This one was for a Honeywell commercial that we did. And they asked us to produce them a commercial that looked as if it had been made by computers. So, first thing we had to do is characters. And we had 3 cracks at it. This was the first crack. We needed a boss character in it and a secretary, but this is the boss character. They regarded this as being far too pretty, far too designed. So we went away. This was too ugly. This they regarded as being in the right area. So we determined our characters. That's the first thing we do. Now, it'd be very nice to be able to just point a camera at all this and put it into the computer that way, but no, life isn't like that, I'm afraid. You have to do working drawings. And there were 15 of these working drawings. This is the character with all its elevations.
That's the businessman with this amazing suit.
That's right, yes, which sadly never got there in the end. It was never used. But all these coordinates are then fed into the computer by the computer operator, our computer animator. So, once that's in, we then have to get things to act. And again, we went back to traditional animation, or traditional animator, and got him to work with a computer animator. And together, they solved all the problems. So the result of it was that you got a piece of acting, you got a performance, not just a series of wooden figures walking
Well, we
around.
actually have a copy of that advert, so perhaps we could have a look at that and see what the end product really looked like.
If you had a Honeywell automated office, it would eat up paperwork and increase secretarial efficiency. It sends messages faster than Concorde and talks to other computers anywhere. Your business could be much more productive with office automation when it's designed well, built well, Honeywell.
Very nice. Well, you're a commercial designer, obviously used to working in limitations of budget and how much money you can spend, but at Imagine, a lot of the things were actually done as research projects. And we've got one here which is really rather nice. It's a piece of material, and it's to follow it as it's lifted up by the corners and shaken, and as it's hung over various objects. It's actually mathematically working out the lines of each of the threads and then contouring between the two of them. It's very realistic. What do you think to it?
I think it's a wonderful piece of research, and it's an amazingly clever piece of work. In fact, I could have used that very thing 2 months ago, I must say, on a commercial for a soap powder that we were involved in. But we had to, in the end, use a model because there was no way of doing it. But I'm very interested to see that.
Yes, it's very nice. Look at it shaking. And this is a rather nice piece of computer graphics where the movements are very realistic.
Yes, this is a really difficult problem. Computer animators for a long time been trying to solve this. This is to be viewed purely as a piece of research. And it's it's about the weight being distributed on the body and making it look heavy and solid. Heaven knows what it's pulling.
No, it's strange that.
Yeah.
Look at that jump, very realistic.
But again, we have a job that we need to do, which is going to need that kind of research.
Well, John Lasseter was a young designer, a young graphics designer at Disney, and he was very successful at Imagineer, in fact. This is one that's quite nice. It actually shows a bee, and he brought this was done in 1984, as a matter of fact, but it brought into some of the techniques he'd used in Disney, where he blurs the actual image on a computer to make it look as if it's moving extremely fast.
Well, here's a technique that's used sensibly. I mean, you need those wings to flap, and that's the way to do it. It's a charming piece of work.
Well, that won the overall third prize, and it's full of Walt Disney techniques. But John Lasseter also won the first prize with an amazing piece of film, and we actually have some of his working drawings, actually, as they were run live on the computer itself. And you can see this is the original character, this angled poised lamp.
Yes, right. You see he's sort of developing the character. Here we have just the angled poised lamp.
Those are the movements he can make at that
right.
point.
That's right. But now we start to see it become a character. That's that's really
it
terrific.
Feels heavy and it feels very weighted, doesn't it? Now he's got to put a story and develop those characters, and we actually have a clip from the final winning entry. It really is a superb piece of graphics. A lot of humanity, and that's difficult to believe it was generated entirely by computers.
Yes, absolutely, but that's great. That's a good point about it. I mean, who cares what it's generated by? It's an absolutely wonderful film. Gets my prize too.
Well, that's virtually it for this week. There are notes for the whole series, which you can get by sending a large stamped addressed envelope to the following address. It's Broadcasting Support Services, P.O. Box 7, London W3 6XJ. That's BSS, P.O. Box 7, London W3 6XJ. But please remember to enclose 75p. Till next week then, goodbye.
Bye.